It started suddenly about 6 weeks ago. I woke in the middle of the night with this nameless terror, unlike anything I'd experienced before. And this isn't a poetic phrasing, nameless terror. It literally was that. There was no name I could put to it. There was no content, no thought associated with it. What it was, terror is the right word, and this overpowering impulse to get out of bed. And so I did. I leapt out of bed, went into the living room, but that wasn't good enough. And so I ran out of my apartment. I ran out of my apartment in the middle of the night. I couldn't be in the apartment. Now, it's worth mentioning that this happened during a OCD episode. I have what I call optimization OCD or decision-making OCD. As the name implies, I get obsessed with decisions, and the compulsion is avoiding making decisions, and then when I make them, reversing my decisions. And this was completely debilitating for me for many years when it first developed 22 years ago now. And I have a lot of recovery. It rarely actually is a problem, but it has been flaring up a lot over the last 6 months. And I think this is because I'm suffering a heartbreak right now, or really heartbreaks. There's two deep heartbreaks. One is the end of a almost 3-year romantic partnership that ended about 6 months ago. The other is my father, who has Alzheimer's. That's not new. He was diagnosed 6 or 7 years ago, but it is very rapidly getting worse. And for me, the OCD, I was not born with OCD. It actually started after a romantic heartbreak 22 years ago. And the way I look at that is the OCD came in to protect me from these sensations, from the emotions, the deep grief in my heart. The OCD was like, well, let's just figure everything out. Let's get everything perfect and you won't suffer. Obviously, I wasn't conscious of that during the time, but that feels true to me. That's the OCD's function at that point. And so it makes sense that now that I'm suffering heartbreak again, the OCD comes in again. So it certainly is nothing like what it was 22 years ago or even 10 years ago, but it's worse than it's been in years. And so this panic, this terror, this nocturnal terror, it was during an OCD episode where there was a particular decision I had to make. And with optimization OCD, recovery is very simple, which is not to say easy. What recovery is making a decision as quickly as possible and sticking with the decision no matter how wrong it feels. And I know this. I know this very well. I've done this thousands, if not tens of thousands of times. Yet I was unwilling to do it with this particular decision, which was not even a particularly significant decision. I kept putting it off and putting it off, knowing full well that the longer I put off this decision, the more painful it's going to be when I make the decision. And yet I kept putting it off. The absolute deadline for this decision was 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. And so Sunday night, I'm getting into bed and I'm like, just make the decision now. Like, it's not going to get any easier. It's only going to get harder, but I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. And that was when I woke up with this nocturnal panic, maybe, 5 a.m. And so even amidst the panic, I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on. I've never had this before, but clearly this is OCD related. So just make the decision right now. And so I did. I made the decision. I locked it in with specific actions, made it irreversible. And I assumed that the panic would dissipate, but it didn't. It kept mounting. It got more and more intense. I was back in my apartment by this point, and so I had to flee my apartment again. And I started sobbing, just sobbing uncontrollably, stalking the dawn streets of Brooklyn, sobbing, just terrified. And finally I collapsed, more or less, just sat on a stoop, head in hands, sobbing for like 20 minutes. Terrified, feeling this sense of utter impending doom that I've rarely, if ever, felt. And then that day, I wound up going to visit my parents. And not just my parents. My parents live in a 2-family house with my sister and brother-in-law and my 3 very, very magical nephews and nieces, whom I'm extremely close with. And which trail do we want to take? Speaking of decision making, let's go this one. And I felt more grounded there. I felt more peaceful there. I was shaken by this panic, but it just felt to me like, okay, this is what happens. You're more vulnerable to OCD, and if you let the OCD go on too long, this is now one of the prices you're going to pay. So don't let the OCD go on this long again. I got back to New York after a week at my parents', And I was then staying at a different place than the place the panic occurred, another friend's place, and was, feeling relatively peaceful and grounded. I say relatively because I rarely have extended periods of peace or feeling grounded, but I also rarely have, at this point in my life, extended periods of feeling particularly ungrounded, though I have felt that way probably more often than not recently. Again, the heartbreak, my father's Alzheimer's. And then I went back to the apartment the panic occurred. And it happened the first night there. And there was no OCD happening at that time. There was no reason for it. But I woke in the middle of the night with this I have to get out of bed. And so I did. I jumped out of bed. Then I'm in the living room. I can't stay in the living room. Then I'm on the streets of Brooklyn. And then I'm crying again. And so I talked to ChatGPT about this because there was no one else I could talk to at 4 a.m. And ChatGPT sensibly said, this is what I basically already knew. I've kind of learned this association between panic in this particular bedroom, and the way out is very simple. Just don't leave the bed. Treat it as an exposure. With OCD, an exposure means doing the thing that scares you and not trying to get out of it, not trying to weasel out of it with reassuring thoughts or compulsions. And this is the same thing. Just stay in the bed. No matter how intense the fear is, it will pass. And I should mention, by the way, that unlike a classic panic attack, I wasn't having elevated heart rate. My breathing wasn't shallow. There were no physiological signs that made me feel like I was in danger of a heart attack or anything like that. It was just this nameless terror that I'd never experienced before. But actually, that's not quite accurate. I had experienced something akin to this terror a few other times in my life. Early on, when I began working with psychedelics, and I was taking very high doses, often alone, often in a very tenuous mental state, I had a number of trips where I started getting this mounting fear, and I had this feeling, we're going to stop here because the sun is intense, and I had this feeling that there was some trauma or repressed memory that I couldn't see, that if I saw it, it was going to destroy me. I had to keep it at bay. And I guess a bit more context, I've always had this feeling, how can I put this? I have all the symptoms of intense trauma without an obvious trauma. Overwhelmingly intense emotions that landed me in a mental hospital when I was 18, body dysmorphic disorder from 12 to 18, then the OCD starting at age 29, much better, but still an issue. All these symptoms that fit in very well with trauma, but without the trauma. So it wasn't entirely unreasonable, this idea that, okay, now I'm tripping, now I'm going to see the horrible trauma, and I'm not prepared to see it, and it's going to destroy me. And so I would try to keep it at bay. But, and I hate the censorship on these apps, with the particular molecule I was working with at this time, which was not mushrooms, it was something else, something that was very popular in the 60s and 70s, as well as, a couple of different compounds that have one of their distinguishing characteristics is they last a very long time. So after 8 or 9 hours of trying to keep this assumed trauma at bay, I was just exhausted, and I'd just be like, fuck it, I can't hold on any longer. Show it to me. Let me see the horrible thing that's almost certainly going to destroy me. And there was nothing there. I would finally relax my grip, prepared to be swamped by this horrible memory, and there was nothing. There was just spaciousness and peace. But that terror felt very much like this nameless terror in the middle of the night, this sense that there's something lurking that I can't afford to, that I can't survive if I see it. And this got worse and worse. Every night, I spent 10 nights in this apartment, and each night it got worse until finally, my penultimate night in the apartment, I was so terrified, I was screaming, "Fuck you, God," repeatedly into a pillow. I was very angry at this God who I don't know if I believe in, but just so terrified. And I called my mom. I actually called her more than once. I called her a few of these nights at like 4 a.m, knowing that she can't help me, knowing it's going to obviously concern her, but just being so desperate, so terrified to be alone with this terror. And the calling her just making me feel more broken, more hopeless. and being more and more terrified that this terror is going to start to infiltrate not just the nights, but the days. And of course, that's what it starts doing. I start going into this almost semi-depersonalized state at times during the day where things feel very shaky. And knowing that the only way through is to face this, to just stay in bed and resolving each night. First, I'm like, all right, I'll stay in bed for 30 minutes with the terror, 30 minutes. But as soon as it hits, I'm running out of bed. The next night, okay, 10 minutes. I can do 10 minutes. Of course I can do 10 minutes, but I can't. 5 minutes. I can't do 5 minutes. And all of this making me feel more broken, more hopeless, more desperate. The whole thing compounding. And then I'm like, fuck it, I have to get out of this apartment. I'm going to go back to my parents' place. I can't function like this. But my last day in this apartment, I smoke a little weed. And weed can be helpful sometimes in getting a little bit of distance and a little bit of insight. And the insight I get is, oh, this is resistance. Not the terror, not the panic, but the screaming into my pillow, the calling my mom, the running out of the apartment. This is fighting this terror. And what if instead I see it as a gift, as hard as that is to do? Because as I said earlier, I don't know if I believe in God, but, it's clear to me that there's an order and an intelligence beyond my comprehension in the universe. And I don't know about you, but for me, whenever I doubt it, I just have to look around in a place like this. Nature makes it very, very apparent. The hard part for me is accepting that order and intelligence is conscious in the way that I would think of consciousness, and that I can connect to it, that it knows I exist, that it heeds my prayers. But I do pray sometimes. And one of my enduring prayers is praying for more willingness to surrender, to not fight things so much, because that's all OCD is, fighting things. I think that's probably all that everything we call mental illness is, fighting things. And I realized when I smoked weed this day that I could view this terror as an answer to this prayer, because this is an opportunity to surrender, and actually a really good opportunity to surrender, because again, it's not like I thought I was having a heart attack. There was no actual danger. It was just this overwhelmingly intense fear. And so I shifted in my mind. I was like, this is a gift. And when the terror comes tonight, I'm going to welcome it. I'm going to dialogue with it in an IFS sense, internal family systems. I'm going to talk to it. I'm going to comfort it. I'm going to try to get to know it. And as soon as I had that thought, I felt the resistance just evaporate. And I realized, oh, I'm not going to have the terror tonight. The resistance is just keeping it alive. But I did. It came that night. I woke. For a few minutes, I was like, yeah, there's no terror. And then terror, terror, terror. Okay, stay in bed. Just stay in bed. Just stay in bed for 5 minutes. Just stay in bed for 5 minutes. And 30 seconds, and I'm out of the bed. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call my mother. I spent most of the night on the couch. I didn't leave the apartment. I wanted to, but I was able to stay in the apartment. And then the next day, I went to my parents' place. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm not going to have the terror here. But I did. But I had 2 prayers by that point in my back pocket, actually written on a manila envelope that is in this very backpack. So one prayer is help me surrender. And the other prayer is help me be present in the moment. And I also conceived of these not as prayers, but as intentions. My intention is to surrender. My intention is to be in the moment. Either way, sometimes it's helpful trying to appeal or connect to a higher power. Sometimes for me, that becomes an obstacle where I'm like, the big objection to a conscious higher power is the horror of the world. Open a newspaper. Though I will say, if I look at my own life, it's not hard to believe that there is some sort of power, and to believe that what is this power's desire for me? Growth. Which of course seems to be the mandate of everything in the universe, of these trees, of the ocean behind these trees. Everything is growing, expanding. So maybe that's what this power that I'm not sure I believe in wants for me. But again, I could look at this as an intention. My intention is to surrender. My intention is to be present, because what I realized is the panic. The initial panic, there's no content, there's no thoughts, but then I start spiraling into like, well, this is going to get worse and worse every night. This is going to take over my waking life. This is ultimately going to lead me to a mental hospital. I'm going to lose everything. And that's a future fear. So being present, being in the moment, being with that fear in the moment, without that, felt like a fruitful intention / prayer. So I'm at my parents' place expecting to sleep well, but it gets me. I wake up and I go to the couch and I'm just really be in the moment, surrender. And it was intense, but instead of being intense for 4 hours, it was intense for maybe a half hour, and I fell back to sleep. And then the next night, I didn't get out of bed for the first time in like 2 weeks. The terror hit, but I was able to stay in bed, just breathe, and I fell back to sleep after about 10 minutes. And now it hasn't come back. But I do believe this is a gift. Part of it is, yes, an opportunity to surrender. But I think part of it is, this points me to this big question, which is, what is behind the OCD? Because this sense of something very wrong with me predated the OCD. That was there from my earliest memories, really. I mean, one of my solo shows is Something is Wrong with Adam Strauss. And basically, spoiler alert, Adam Strauss doesn't know what it is. So, is there some trauma there that's been repressed, or maybe a trauma that predates my own birth, an epigenetic trauma, an ancestral trauma? I'm Jewish, a lot of trauma in that lineage. I mean, there's a lot of trauma in every lineage. Yeah, and it reinforces this idea that I've had, which is as I get more and more freedom from OCD, there is also a sense that it's not enough. That I have to go below the OCD, beneath the OCD, more into the roots. Otherwise, what happens, and I'm seeing this, is when I'm dealing with stressful, painful life situations, as I am with these heartbreaks right now, the OCD gets very active, even though I know what to do for recovery. And I think the reason that happens is the OCD is trying to protect me from something that at least it thinks is scarier, darker. So I'm humbled by this, very humbled by this, in the best sense, made small, realizing the limits of my control and my understanding of myself, my psyche, and also I'd say with more resolve to, I've got to go deeper with this. And I'm not sure how, because I've explored all the major, all of them, but certainly psychedelics, IFS, but I did recently start EMDR. As a result of this panic, I reached out to I wasn't in therapy, so we'll see where that leads. All right. Well, as you can see, I'm in a beautiful place, and I want to look at things other than my face reflected in my phone. So I hope this helps someone. Maybe it helps me.